Voices help extend his voice further than he can shout, or amplify his senses 1,000-fold. We have towns and transport, workplaces and playgrounds, all because of man's unsurpassed ability to design and build machines and structures that work. But the human body itself has been called the soft machine. Inside us, we contain complex organs and systems that appear to have been designed to carry out all our bodily needs as efficiently as possible. The materials we're made from, the shapes of our organs, and our internal communication systems are better designed and more efficient than any man-made devices. And this soft machine is not only efficient, evolution has seen to it that it's often very pleasing to look at. The most astonishing aspect of our bodies is that they were never designed in the way man designs his machines, starting as drawings on a blueprint and laboriously constructed to detailed specifications. Our components are the results of millions of tiny improvements accumulated in the bodies of generations of predecessors from the first living cells. The living body solved all of its engineering problems before the first human engineer ever appeared on the scene. The body needs oxygen from the air outside. It seems like a simple task, since we live in an ocean of air. But pipes and gas tanks and a pump are needed to gather the oxygen and distribute it round the body in the blood. The pump must beat for 70 years or more, and the pipes have to respond to rapid changes in the body's need for blood. And by using oxygen, we produce waste gases, which can't be allowed to build up, so we need more pipes to get rid of them, and another pump to restore the pressure. This ramshackle network might satisfy a human engineer, but the body has come up with a better design, based on the human heart. Nature has produced two pumps that beat as one, stuck back to back in the human chest. The convoluted interior of the heart is a result of millions of years of evolution to make best use of the available space. The heart started as two pulsing tubes, and the way it develops in a fetus shows how the pressures of space seem to have sculpted the two pumps of the heart into their final shape.
Wherever we look in the body, we find signs of a design process that doesn't waste a cubic inch of space. The surface layer of the brain contains the most important cells for our human intelligence. As we evolved, to become cleverer, we needed more brain cells. But our heads couldn't increase in size because we'd then have difficulty squeezing through our mother's pelvis at birth. As space between the brain and the skull got tighter, the brain surface became crinkled. Now only a third of the brain's surface is exposed. If all the crinkles were smoothed out, the surface of the brain would cover the area of a pillowcase, far too large to fit in the head. The human lungs have an even greater need for space. If this network of tubes was opened out flat, it would cover an area of 50 square meters. There are 300 million tiny spheres at the ends of these airways. Each of them is continually bathed in blood, which has only a fraction of a second to pick up oxygen from the air we breathe in. That's why we need such a large surface area. In that fraction of a second, the two lungs have to pick up all the oxygen the body needs. As if that compression weren't enough, the intestine manages to contain an internal surface area the size of a tennis court. The digestive tract is 6 meters or so long from mouth to anus. Here, food is broken down by digestive juices into its individual molecules, and the blood circulation wrapped around the intestine carries them off to be delivered where they're needed. The molecules are squeezed out of the intestine through these walls. Their furry appearance is the secret of their success, because the walls are made up of millions of tiny fingers that provide a much greater area than if the intestine were a smooth tube. Each finger, here's just one of them, waves around in the mush of broken down food, and all over its surface there are pores through which the food molecules pass. By breaking up the wall of the intestine in this way, evolution has led to 600 times the area there would be if the wall was smooth. And that means much more efficient absorption of food. Wherever we look, we can see examples of how the design of the living body economizes on space. In fact, seeing itself, the most important sensory activity, depends on sense organs which contain within a tiny space devices and systems that would be the envy of any engineer. Outside the eyeball is this little bone pulley to bend the pathway of a muscle that helps us look down. And as we look deeper into the eyes, we find that each component is working at the limits of what's possible in such a confined space. The light messages of the outside world vary from blinding brightness to impenetrable darkness, but they all have to enter the eye through the iris, a variable aperture that cuts down light that's too bright or lets in as much light as possible when it's dark. Behind the iris is the lens, colored red here, though it's really transparent. This also changes shape so that whatever is most important in the image is focused sharply on the back of the eye where we actually see it. Here is the most remarkable few square centimeters of tissue in the body, the retina. That dark circle in the center is a reflection of the pupil, through which every detail of the entire outside world enters the eye. This layer of cells is little bigger than a postage stamp, and yet it can break down any scene we see into 120 million separate elements. There's a network of blood vessels over the retina that should make us see the world like this. Fortunately, we've evolved a way to compensate so that our need for as clear a view as possible isn't affected by the retina's need for blood. The eye responds almost instantaneously to changes outside it. And in fact, we've survived so well because our whole bodies have found ways to adapt to change.
In a hot situation like this, where the red color shows the skin at its hottest, the body surface has taken advantage of the evaporation of water to cool it down. That's why it becomes bluer in this thermographic image. We can't tell which creature first discovered the trick, but we can now all pour water onto the skin to cool it down by sweating. Buried in the skin are thousands of sweat glands, each one a masterpiece of simple design. This twisted gland can extract water from the blood when we're hot and push it to the surface to cool the area of skin above it. The water contains useful chemicals, and so the twisty journey to the surface is long enough for these chemicals to be reabsorbed into the body, rather than going to waste on the surface. Each part of the living body has developed the shape and the structure that's best for the task it has to perform. But it's not just the shape of our components that matters. The different shapes of teeth certainly help to break up the food at the front of the mouth and to crush it at the back. But they owe their success to the materials they're made of. Dental enamel is the hardest substance in the body, probably because it developed to crack the nuts and bones in our animal ancestors' diet. The living body is made up of many different materials that provide a combination of strength and flexibility. Jolts like this would shatter the bones if we didn't have good shock absorbers tucked between every bone in the spine. With this kind of protection, we can subject our bodies to 10 times the force of gravity and get away with it. But even the body has its limits. Although bone has the strength of cast iron, there are times when it gives up the unequal struggle with man's spirit of adventure, or foolhardiness. Much of our success as human beings lies in the way our bodies work as a coordinated system to respond to our changing needs. However safe this ride really is, her body is programmed to respond as if her life was in danger. The beating of the heart has become a symbol of life. The faster it beats, the more blood it's pumping round her body to supply organs and tissues with oxygen and food that might be needed for an extra burst of energy. But the heart can't respond on its own to the terrors of the ride. It's just a simple pump, awaiting instructions from a higher authority. It's the perception of danger by the eyes and the brain that leads to a whole chain of responses inside the body, involving nerve circuits and hormone-producing glands. Almost every part of the body is affected in an emergency, culminating in a heart that may beat at twice its normal rate. It may be just a bit of fun nowadays, but this reaction is typical of many reflex actions built into the body by millions of years of evolution. Our bodies developed ways of making the best use of signals in the environment, signals that contain a threat for us to avoid or pleasure for us to seek.
The body has actually developed a way to detect substances in the air. When a cup of coffee or a piece of burning toast produces a smell, it's actually releasing portions of itself into the air. Our bodies can detect those portions and usually tell what they've come from with sensitive cells in the nose. In the air we breathe, there are millions of different molecules. If each of them produced a smell, we'd live in a perpetual state of odorous chaos. But our bodily mechanisms will detect some molecules and not others. We don't smell oxygen and taste pure water. Our senses have developed to pick out the changing elements in the environment because they're likely to be more meaningful. The sense of smell is perhaps the most sensitive molecule detector in existence. It only needs a few individual molecules of coffee or toast to travel this pathway for us to detect them at the end. If the molecules dissolve in the fluid that lines the nasal passages, they'll be detected by millions of hair-like projections on these cells as they sweep back and forth. These tiny hairs can detect up to 4,000 different smells. As the molecules from outside arrive at the smell receptors, they dissolve in the fluid that surrounds them and trigger a message to the brain. Just a handful of molecules will signal that a smell is there, but the concentration must be 50 times greater for us to be able to tell what the smell is. The best guess we can make for how we distinguish all these smells is that we have receptors to detect the shape of individual molecules. So the molecule that comes from the burnt toast is likely to have a detectably different shape from the one that comes from a cup of coffee or a dog or any other smelly substance. Our sense messages are only useful if we can act on them. And the amazing sensitivity of our senses is matched by an equally amazing accuracy when we move. All the information that flows into and out of the body is carried along nerves. Each muscle movement in these fingers is triggered by a nerve impulse that arrives from the brain and then disappears before the next one arrives. The smallest detectable smell or sound and the strongest muscle contraction are coded as impulses traveling along nerves somewhere in the body. Nerve fibers carry information at just the speed and rate that's best for each type of nervous activity. For the fastest messages, our nerves have developed a special coating that allows an impulse to leap from gap to gap at speeds of up to 100 meters a second, compared with much slower fibers at a meter or so a second. And nerve messages are carried in a simple code that enables them to travel from one end of the body to the other without being distorted or fading away. Like a wave of dominoes falling, the message arrives at the end of its path as loud and clear as when it started out.
With all our knowledge about how the body works, it's easy to forget that there are still many mysteries left. The least well-known areas of the living body are those that deal with what makes us human and fundamentally different in so many ways from our animal ancestors. Many of the body's mysteries lie in the brain, an organ far more complex than any man-made computer. Scientists and philosophers can't even agree on whether the mind and the brain are separate, let alone how connections between thousands of millions of nerve cells in many different layers can give rise to all the varieties of human behavior. We don't know how our emotions or our intelligence are linked to brain structure, or how this mush of software can contain the memories of a human lifetime. And as for how to interpret the waves of electrical activity that sweep across the brain awake or asleep, we can deduce about as much as we can from the roar of a crowd in a football stadium. And if the brain seems inconceivably complex, what are we to make of this? Human chromosomes, invisible to the naked eye, and yet capable of storing a detailed description of the brain itself, as well as every other part of the living body. In the nucleus of our cells, there are 46 chromosomes, collections of genes containing the human blueprint. Scientists just about understand the alphabet that the description's written in, along molecules of DNA, but they're a long way from understanding the language. The mystery of how human development is controlled, of how a cell becomes a speck of tissue and the speck becomes a living, moving child, is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. The timing of when to start growing and when to stop, the changes in 3 dimensions that produce the orderly development of a child, are all controlled in a way we don't yet understand. We can only watch and marvel. For years to come, there'll be mysteries about the living body and how it works, just as there are mysteries about why people behave in the way they do. What is certain is that underneath the rich variety of human behavior around us, there lie organs and systems that work in the same way for all of us, the latest models in 3,500 millions of years of evolution.